You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, this is Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. There, lady sings it, that makes it official. Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. We certainly appreciate it. As always, we have the most smartest minds on the shows. The brilliant authors, the Pulitzer Prize winners, the CEOs, the billionaires, you name it. All the smartest people on this show, and they bring you their stories of life and journey. And as we always say, stories are the owner's manual to life. They help us learn. They help us be better. They'll improve the quality of our life. If you're listening to the Chris Voss Show and your life hasn't gotten better, you better go back and listen to all the shows. I learned, we've done 2,000 shows over 16 years. I've learned more from our guests than probably any sort of college I could learn in a lifetime, especially across the broad spectrum of everything that is in regards to life. So it's not even a specialized field. So like I'm a master of everything, basically, at this point, or a layman, I don't know, a novice. We have an amazing author on the show with his newest book that just came out April in 25. I'm sorry, did I read that right? April 25 it comes out? Or
April 25th in the UK, yeah, it's 14th of May in the US. Not April 2025, otherwise you'd be way ahead of your time.
I'm on the University of California press site, and we just pulled that as your book site, and I always tell the dates because people watch our videos 10 to 15 years from now. And so if it's a new book, they make ugly comments like, you're stupid. I'm like, dude, see when the video's made? It came out May, what was it again?
It was April the 25th with Penguin in the UK.
Okay, there you go. So April 25th, and other people are going to have to wait till next year because that's just how they're rolling. The book is entitled, I set up the suspense for it, is entitled May Contain Lies, How Stories, Statistics, and Studies Exploit Our Biases, and what we can do about it. So it's a roadmap of in and out. Alex Edmans joins us on the show with us today. You've heard a little bit from him, and he's going to be talking to us about his book and his insights, and of course, some of you may have to wait till next year. Alex is a professor of finance at London Business School. His TED Talk, What to Trust in a Post-Truth World, has been viewed 2 million times. He's spoken at the World Economic Forum, Davos, and the UK Parliament. In 2013, he was awarded tenure at the Wharton School, and in 2021, he was named MBA Professor of the Year by Poets and Quants. Edmans writes regularly for the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the Harvard Business Review. I love that. His first book, Grow the Pie, was a Financial Times Book of the Year, and he's a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. See, we bring all the smart people on the show. Welcome to the show, Alex. How are you?
Great, thanks. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for coming as well. It's so funny. I pulled the University of California press site, and I guess I pulled the English version. Give us a .coms. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
So my main website is alexedmans.com, but I'm also on X and LinkedIn under A. Edmans. And so I'll post research, academic research, but always with a practitioner bent. So what my passion is to use research to affect the way people do business and live their lives.
There you go. So give us a 30,000 overview of what's inside this new book.
So this new book is about misinformation, but it's with a twist. So we often think that misinformation is about checking the facts. So if somebody claims that Barack Obama is not a natural-born US citizen, you can pull up his birth certificate and that will confirm it.
But should at least,
or at least should if you're listening to the data. But what I'm highlighting is it's more than just checking the facts. So even if the facts are 100% accurate, there could still be misleading inferences. So let's give an example. So there's the famous book Start With Why, about having a why, having a passion, having a purpose leads to success. And the evidence for that is Apple started with why, and Apple is hugely successful. That is a fact. Nobody can dispute Apple's success. But that is only one cherry-picked example. There could be hundreds of other cases where companies started with why and failed, but you never hear them because the author doesn't want to give the exceptions that actually don't fit his story. So even if something's true, it could be misleading if we over extrapolate from it.
Ah, there you go. And there's a lot of disinformation in the world right now. I mean, when you say the era of distrust, what is behind that? Is it the death of experts? Is it that everyone got a blog and can post their opinions and flood out true speaking news and facts?
I think it's a couple of things. So let's start with the consumer side, the people who receive misinformation. We suffer from confirmation bias, and that includes me. So confirmation bias is we've got a certain view of the world, and if we see something that conforms to that view, we lap it up uncritically without questioning. And in contrast, if we see something which contradicts our worldview, we will not believe it, we will just rubbish it and try and tear it apart. And so what for producers of misinformation is that if you have a platform, and as you say, Chris, this could even just be a blog or a LinkedIn or Twitter feed, if you say something that people want to be true, then it might go viral, even if the evidence behind it is pretty flimsy.
There you go. It's definitely something everyone has had a challenge with, especially, and it might get worse with AI. What are your thoughts on that? Is AI going to make, we're seeing now people, and I'm seeing this from friends, about, I think a figure I heard kicked around was 46% of people cannot discern from really bad AI renditions of human beings. You can still tell the eyes and fingers are fucked up. They can't tell from fake AI photos and deep fakes at all. And right now the technology is really bad. It's really obvious, but they can't tell. Maybe it's because they're looking at it in a tiny phone. What do you think about AI? What sort of impact is that going to have on disinformation?
So it could be positive and it could be negative, like most things. So on the positive side, AI can hopefully highlight if something is incorrect. So let's say you latch on to the study by Andrew Wakefield that vaccination leads to autism. What AI can do is to look at the scientific consensus, look at other papers, and they find that this Wakefield paper is just unusual. But on the flip side, people can use AI to generate misinformation. So before the age of AI, you already have the problem that people attribute quotes to Albert Einstein or Mark Twain that were never said. Similarly with AI, and if you use it in a smart way, somebody could ask AI to write something in the tone of a famous author or a famous scientist, and people don't know that he or she never actually said or wrote it.
Wow. Yeah. And like I say, I mean, some of the AI that's out there, it's really cool. It's inventive. It's imaginary. But I can tell at this point, for the most part, I don't think I've seen too many images that I can't figure out are AI generated. You can tell most times. And, a lot of it's really easy to do. The fingers are fucked up. The eyeballs are usually not right. There's different, like a lot of AI images, the more you look at them and the more you kind of blow them up a little bit, you can just tell. Yeah, I mean, I can pick up on most of it right away. I'm like, that's a little too fantastical. But
I think you're right for images, yeah. But I think the more complex thing where AI can get a bit cleverer is text. So if they were to come up with a quote in the style of a person, or they could write a big report and say this report was done by these famous scientists, and that's the concern. Because you're absolutely right. With images, they're not yet there, but with text, it's easier to get away with that. Yeah,
and it'll be interesting to see how AI affects the upcoming election. I mean, you can make deepfake videos now. It looks like famous politician is involved in some sort of porno. You could. There was a recent thing where a guy who, I think he was a coach at a school, he didn't like his principal for writing him up for some misappropriation of funds. He faked an AI call that sounded like the principal's voice saying a bunch of racist stuff, and got the principal, they automatically suspend you or, look into what you're doing. But the police, thankfully, were savvy enough to figure out that this was a fake AI call, and they found who created it. And but this is going to get out of hand if people at the lowest levels of society. I could see people doing this at political level, or if you're trying to, I don't know, extort Elon Musk maybe. But if we're all just going to start throwing away AI fakes at each other, it's going to get really quick. We'll round back to the book, but our people like to know about the author. Tell us a little bit about you. What grew you up? What got you into being a journalist or talking about these things, writing, et cetera, and into some of these subjects?
Yeah, so I grew up in the UK, which will not surprise you given my accent. And in the UK, the school system's unusual. You have to specialise very early. So when you finish high school, you might do 3 or 4 subjects only.
Oh.
And so some people do like maths, physics, chemistry, just sciences. Others will do history, English, German, some arts. I did a mixture, and that's useful for sort of my background. I did both English and German, but also economics and maths. And so that's how I ended up in social sciences. So being a professor of economics and finance, you do have some theories, so it's not completely subjective. But unlike physics and chemistry, these are not set in stone, so you can have different viewpoints. So, Chris, you and I could see the same data on the economy. I might think taxes should be higher. You might think taxes should be lower. We can respectfully have a discussion about that, and no person is clearly right or wrong. So I ended up doing economics, and then I actually had a proper job for a while. I was an investment banker at Morgan Stanley for a couple of years, but then I wanted to become a professor. I did a PhD at MIT in the US, was a professor at Wharton, now moved back home to London Business School. And so why did I leave the well-paid job of investment banking for the poorly paid job of academia? I think the bandwidth of your impact is high. So if you write a book or even go on a podcast, that's something that thousands of people, tens of thousands of people can listen to. It can also be timeless, whereas as a banker, you're solving one company's problems at that one time. So I think the impact that you can have is potentially large.
There you go. There you go. And as you wrote the book prior, and I don't have it before me, what was the title of the book you had prior?
Grow the Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit.
Yeah. Great book. People loved it. There you go.
Yeah, and so what that book is about is social responsibility, the idea that companies can contribute towards wider society, and this is not at the expense of profit. So there is the ESG culture wars in the US where some people say woke capitalism, this is just misguided, you're just losing money. But what I'm trying to highlight is that if companies treat their employees well, treat their customers well, invest in reducing their environmental impact, those are things that don't give pie to the wider society. They grow the pie, and therefore shareholders are better off as a result.
There you go. Yeah, the rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. So now, what motivated you on to write this book? What was it that drove you?
So as a professor, I'm quite unusual. So rather than just doing academic research just to be read by other academics and sit in the library, as I mentioned at the start, I really like to use this to speak to practitioners. This could be policymakers, managers, investors, journalists, podcast hosts. But sometimes what I found was how people responded to the research. This would be based on whether they liked what it said rather than its actual accuracy. So if they liked the conclusion, they thought it was the world's best paper. And if it was an uncomfortable, inconvenient truth, they would say this is just some academic stuff. It's got no relation to the real world. So I thought if I spent the rest of my career just writing more and more academic papers, this is pointless, because whether it actually cuts through will be based on whether people like its findings. So I wanted to speak about how we should respond to evidence in general, to highlight the biases, like confirmation bias, that cause us to be uncritical on the one hand with some things and hypercritical on the other hand with things that we don't like, and also to give the reader simple tips, even if you're time pressed, even if you don't have a PhD in statistics, to figure out whether or not I can trust a particular study or conclusion.
There you go. And we need to realize that we have confirmation bias. How do we, there's something, do you talk about the Dunning-Kruger disease by chance in the book?
Not explicitly, but there is the theme throughout that sometimes people are just overconfident about their abilities. And actually this idea of misinformation, it is actually smarter people who suffer more from misinformation.
Oh, really?
You might actually think it's the opposite. The smarter you are, then the more likely you are to spot deep fakes.
So I'm pretty dumb then, because I can identify deep fakes. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think it might be. It's more in terms of the data and the information rather than the images. But why might you have this counterintuitive result with data and evidence? Is if you're really smart, if you see something you don't like, you can come up with a whole ton of excuses as to why this is wrong, and you can ignore it. But you don't apply the same critical thinking faculties when there's something you do. So let's give an example with Silicon Valley Bank. They had models which predicted that if interest rates rose, they would go bust. Those seemingly smart executives came up with some reasons as to why the model's assumption should be changed to give the result that they wanted, and as a result, the bank blew up.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The confirmation bias, we've run into these two camps. In politics, we have the same thing. There are certain people that watch one channel, which sadly feeds them a lot of sort of PR material. In fact, news channel is probably the wrong word to use, news. And then there's other news channels, and there's variances of bias, but people tend to find what they, what's fed to them is what they believe. And they just end with that confirmation bias. How do people recognize that they're doing that? If I'm sitting at home listening to this going, I wonder if I have any, confirmation biases, or I'm doing what I do. How can people maybe recognize that and come to some a workout or workaround?
So I think one thing is just to see where you're getting your information, what are your sources. And so if you're only watching Fox News, that could be an issue. But then to apply this to myself, because the danger of writing a book like this is you need to be held up to your own standards. A few years ago, there was the referendum on whether the UK should leave the EU. And I was a strong Remainer, and all my friends were, and everybody in my network was. But then I deliberately tried to go to some talks by Brexiters. Now, I used to think these people are uninformed, they're xenophobic, but when I went to these talks, I realized that they had some good arguments. So I might not have always agreed with the conclusion, but I still saw there was logic behind them. So I tried to go out of my way to see the opposite viewpoint.
Yeah. There's a I think it was Abraham Lincoln who did a quote, and I might butcher it, so just ride with me, folks in the audience. But I think it says something about how I think he was referring to a fellow politician or someone he didn't know, and he said, I don't like that man. I should get to know him better, something along those lines. And in that quote, what he recognized was that if you don't like someone, sometimes you just maybe don't know them better. Maybe you've jumped to assumptions or conclusions about them. And I've done that with people across my life. And then when I've gotten to know them better, I have more empathy. I have more rapport with them. I understand maybe where they come from. Sometimes they're still disagreeable sort of people because they have some sort of childhood traumas or issues from trauma that they haven't reconciled. And so they're acting out in that way, but at least when I get to know them better, I can understand why they're doing that, and I can be okay. This person definitely has some issues, and most of my audience does that. They're like, "This Chris Voss guy, he has a lot of issues," but I'm working on them, folks. Give me time. It's been 20 years of therapy. I sound like Howard Stern. This is one of those things. But being able to recognize, the one thing about Dunning-Kruger is you kind of recognize that. You're not as smart as you are. But it's interesting what you said, that the smartest people seem to be the people that don't recognize they're having confirmation bias. Is that because, let me ask you this, is that because usually people that we perceive are very smart are very particulate in their line of expertise or work? If I'm a scientist, I'm really focused in on maybe one scientific study or one sort of scientific fact. Maybe that's my PhD or something. Imagine smart people, when they're looking at certain things specifically, they're so focused in on that they can't maybe see the world outside them or something. Is that a factor?
I certainly think it can be, because you have to become very specialist, and if you become very specialist, then you don't appreciate other types of opinions on the particular topic. And also, if you're really smart, you think your confirmation bias might be even stronger, because you think, I've got a view of the world, because I'm really smart, my view of the world is the right one. Other views of the world are going to be wrong because they're not as smart as me, and so you become particularly entrenched. And one example in the book The Big Short by Michael Lewis, he covers this guy Howie Hubler, who was the head of proprietary credit at Morgan Stanley, where if you told him there was an issue with his trades, he would say, get the hell out of my office. Why? He was such a star trader, and then he put on some trades which allegedly lost $9 billion. That is a lot of money to lose. And there were a lot of people allegedly either trying to tell him or just afraid of telling him. They self-censored because they knew there was no point, because he wouldn't listen to them. He was so smart, he would dismiss what you're saying.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that'll bite you in the butt every time. Really. It's It's really interesting that people focus on stuff. You know, I've met a lot of PhDs, and God bless them. They're wonderful people. They're specialized in what they do. But I've met a lot of PhDs that, other than the field of focus that they did on a PhD, they couldn't punch their way out of a paper bag in life. Not all of them, but many of them. I'm just like, you're really bad at everything else except for what you focused on. And sometimes I don't think they're great on what they focused on. You just, sometimes they focus on such a narrow niche that's so isolated from everything else. You're just like, like one thing in life, and that's about it.
Yes, and they view it from one particular lens, and it can be just a very academic lens. And this is particularly interesting in my field, which is being a business school professor, is that there are many business school professors who've never worked for a company in their life, and we're trying to teach people on how to run companies, but without that perspective, if you've always been in academia, that might be somewhat different. Now, there are some great business school professors who have only gone in academia, but I think there are many who might benefit from a couple of years in the real world, because that would give them a different perspective.
Yeah, most definitely. It's really interesting how that whole thing plays out and works, because you're just like, how are you so bad at like all of this? And people in psychiatry, I've met people in psychiatry that are just awful psychiatrists. I'm like, do you have a mirror? Like, you need more help than maybe some of your clients do. But a lot of people go into psychiatry because they have childhood trauma or damage. And my thinking is that basically they go into psychiatry because it's cheaper to do that and fix the childhood trauma than it is to pay somebody to do it. Usually when I meet people that go into psychiatry, especially women, early on, I'll ask them, what happened to you as a child? And 99.9% of the time, there's something that happened tragically, and they're going into psychiatry to fix it. I haven't met everybody who went into psychiatry, but the numbers seem to be there. It's like a lot of times people get kind of drawn to that group because those are their issues. What are some other aspects of the book that we haven't talked about?
I think one is the difference between correlation and causation, which make people know in the cold light of day, but when your biases are taking over, then you might get some basic things wrong. And let me again give an example from me getting something wrong. So before I had my child, we took a course on parenting, and a lot of it was really important things like how to change a nappy and what to do when your baby is sick. But there were courses on breastfeeding. And they said breastfeeding is the only thing you should give to your kid. The World Health Organization recommends exclusive breastfeeding, no water, no formula for the first 6 months. And people say breast is best because that rhymes, that sounds good.
I'm still getting breastfeeding.
Well, that's what leads to high success. That's consistent with all the studies which claim breastfeeding is good for IQ, it's good for health, it's good for maternal kid bonding. But then actually, when you look into the data, this is a correlation and it's not causation. So it's true that breastfed kids have, say, higher IQ than bottle-fed kids. But who is it who gets breastfed? So breastfeeding is really tough. So it may well be that mothers with a more supportive home environment are able to breastfeed because it's challenging. And it could be that home environment which leads to the better outcomes. And so actually when you control for the mother's home environment, for the maternal income, the maternal education, i.e. you strip out all of the effects of those factors on IQ or health, you actually find very little effect of breastfeeding. And so why I think that's so striking is that we tell mothers you have to breastfeed, they feel guilty if they want to reach for the bottle, but because breastfeeding is tough, this leads to bleary-eyed mothers feeling they have to breastfeed even if they want to break, and this black and white idea that you should only breastfeed your kid, this is not supported by the evidence.
Wow. I didn't really think about that, because we always have these studies that say, if you do this one thing, everything will be fine. If you drink 3 cups of coffee a day, I'm just making an example about people. People will write me. If you drink 3 cups of coffee a day, you won't get liver disease. Something stupid like that. And so we are like, let's drink 3 cups of coffee. And, as you said, there are mitigating factors around that maybe they had really good genetics. Maybe usually when they do their sample size groups, they're supposed to have some variant, but maybe there were other mitigating factors that did that. Maybe it was the sugar in their coffee that made it. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
No, but you're quite right, Chris. Yeah, because so who is it who can drink 3 cups of coffees a day? This is not random. So I don't know what coffees are costing like now in the US. I've not been in the US. I lived there 10 years ago. But in the UK, 3 cups of coffee a day might cost you like £10, and so that's not small if you have it every day. So the people who are able to afford 3 coffees a day might be wealthier people to begin with, and it could be their wealth which is leading to all of the positive outcomes, not the coffee drinking.
There you go. It's you see people, they always tell you different things. Bob lived to 100 because he didn't smoke. And then you see, I forget who the famous vaudeville actor was back in the day, George Burns. He smoked until he was like 100, 102. He's like 2 cigarettes a day. And, a lot of it seems to come down to genetics more than anything else. I don't know. I could be biased. I couldn't have information bias. Now I'm going to start having to disclose that every time. I could be information biased, but this is my opinion. But you look at some things and some of the things they tell you, and I think that's where people get really confused too. Is that specialized sort of thing? It's like we used to say, hey, if you eat lots of grains and bread and butter, you'll be fine. And then they went, hey, you need to eat margarine with that bread. And they went back to butter, and it's weird the world we live in. But yeah, now when I look at facts from here on out, when you tell me stuff, I'm going to think of mitigating circumstances. I might even look at political polls that way, because how political polls have been wrong in the last, I think since 2015, 16. Part of it's the questioning and what they set up, but a lot of it seems to be mitigating factors. If they say, would you vote for Bob if he supported abortion? Oh yeah, but Bob meanwhile is a I don't know, he's an awful person and doing illegal things or something, and you would vote for Bob if he supported that. There might be other reasons why you will not vote for him. I think we saw that in 2020, and hopefully we see that in the future. I mean, just because someone supports something doesn't mean you should vote for the worst person in the world.
And also, you wonder who gets to respond to these polls, because in the past, if the polls were done by telephone, then people typically had your home telephone number, not your work number. Yeah. And so who are the people at home? These might be people who are out of a job. And so you are polling an unrepresentative selection of the population. Or sometimes maybe if now the polls are on the internet, then maybe you're polling people who have got smartphones and have got greater access. So whenever you have a poll, it might not be truly random. And so the results that you have might be due to the sample. And that's why, as you say, Chris, a lot of recent polls have been incorrect.
Yeah, people that will actually answer the phone. I won't answer my phone unless I know exactly who it is, because I still to this day get these illegal spam calls. I got 2 yesterday, and I actually picked them up thinking it must be a friend of mine, and you could hear right away it was like some call from some call center, and it does the whole biz line thing. And so yeah, it's I never really thought about. I think I thought about it once, but yeah. I mean, people's maybe, whoever's picking up call, it's kind of like that joke about jury duty. The only people who seem to go into jury duty are people who don't read the news and don't have a fucking idea what's going on. They always ask them, have you been reading about this in the news? Oh, no, I haven't. Okay, you could be on the jury duty. Do you read about anything else in the news? Like, you're not watching TV in the news. Like, do you even know what's going on in the fucking world? Or what's happening? What year is it? But let's put you on a jury, and that's how OJ got off, folks. You go, this is very insightful. I'm hoping a book like yours can help people overcome their confirmation bias. Sad part is do a lot of people with confirmation bias read?
I think they do. Well, but they read things that they think they will like. And so what I try to do here is to highlight that these issues of biases and information, these are actually quite simple issues. So there's not a single equation in the entire book. What I'm trying to highlight here is that it's often common sense. So just the arguments that you make, Chris, as to who is it who responds to polls, who is it that serves on a jury, those are the same common sense arguments that I'm trying to initiate within the reader whenever you see a study that you want to be true. And also my goal was to make it as engaging and entertaining and fun as possible. So my hope is that by reading the book, you don't only feel smarter at the end of it, but you also feel entertained and it's fun. So I put a lot of effort into trying to making the writing flow and to be quite engaging.
There you go. I'm going to read it, and then that way I won't have any confirmation bias, and I can go around and tell everybody how it is. I'll just be the smartest person on the planet. But no, we need to focus on this. I've been guilty in my past for watching news channels that I thought, fairly open, MSNBC, and then realizing later they were fairly biased. And I love the people at MSNBC. We've had some people recently on the show. I had to go, okay, I need to stick with CNN. And there's so much of it that's out there that you go down the line from. And I think part of it is I meet people now that they don't know the difference between the news page of the Washington Post and the opinion page. And they'll argue some maybe political point with you, and they'll say, that isn't true. This is what the news is. And I'm like, where are you quoting that from? And they're quoting from the opinion page.
And actually, on that point, this is really important, because what was the biggest piece of evidence used to support the prescription of opioids in the US? It was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, which was entitled "Addiction Rare in Patients Treated with Narcotics." You think it's the New England Journal of Medicine, this is a scientific study. It was a letter to the editor. So it was the equivalent of the opinion page rather than the news page. So over 1,600 articles have cited this letter as evidence that opioids don't lead to addiction, when it was never a study. It was just somebody's opinion. And so we've seen some serious consequences of that, obviously.
Wow. That's just it's extraordinary. So this is a book everyone should darn read. Maybe we can put this in schools, force people to read it and stuff like that, because it seems like we should be teaching this at a very early age, or we need to teach, especially with AI, as to how do people recognize disinformation, how can they analyze and understand information that's presented to them. It's so freaking important. It's not even funny. There you go. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, Alex.
Thanks very much, Chris. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. And thanks to for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss, and all those crazy places on the internet. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. And that should have